Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this workshop. I will be your moderator. The workshop called Indexing Social Futuring, Content and Methods, and we will concentrate primarily to index the ecological and geopolitical and the technological index pillar. I would like to introduce our invited participants from the right side to the left side. So the first is Mr. János Csák, the head of the project Connect 2015.
He's from the left or the right?
That's right.
Yes.
From this side.
From my place to the other place, maybe it's
Everybody is
better.
right.
Yes. We are in a round, so it's almost a roundtable discussion, but it's not important. So the second is Mr. Huang Ping, the senior professor and General Director of the Institute of European Studies of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Mr. George Friedman, a geopolitical forecaster and strategist from the Geopolitical Futures. Mr. Ivan Kristov, a professor from the Pázmány Péter Catholic University. Mr. Laurent Ambrouche, senior research fellow of our center, of the Social Futuring Center, and rapporteur of this workshop. Mr. László Lovasi, our associated senior research fellow. Ms. Judith Göszler, research fellow of the Corvinus University of Budapest, and Mr. Balázs Szepesi, our senior research fellow. Thank you for accepting our invitation. So, our objective with our time today is to share some of the thinking about the measurement of social futuring index. We will have 75 minutes and we have 4 questions. We will have 50 minutes to answer the first 2 questions. You got this guide for the workshop, and here is the 4 questions. And the first 2 questions are the following. What kind of points of view of internationally accepted indicators, indices, measurable concept should be taken into account for primarily the before mentioned 2 pillars? And the second is what kind of content points of view of relevant, reliable and trustworthy international databases should be taken into account for each pillar of social futuring index. So we will have 50 minutes and I would like to ask you to consider this question and answer it around in 5 minutes. And I would like to suggest that please Mr. Csák to start answering this question.
Can I start it? Balázs?
Yes.
If you don't mind, Balázs.
No, I'm too. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm Balázs Szepesi. I work for the center and meanwhile I have 2 backgrounds, partly in public policy, in Hungarian European field and in institutional economics. And I worked a lot with indicators and measurements. I have a lot to say for the first question, but I try to keep some ideas for the second. So what I thought about, what are the issues to think about? The first point, I think that, so there is a very nice part in the Godfather 2, when the Corleone says that we can kill anyone. It's not a question whom to kill, but the only question is how. I think it's true for measurement too. We can measure anything. There are measurements. The only question is how. So I think that the first point is to find out what are the fields of study, what are the issues to measure. János, in his short contribution, gave us some examples. That first we should know how to, what is our concept of creativity. Because if we just import a measure of creativity, we import something we don't know what it is. So first I think that what is important to find what are the issues in this 4 normative criteria, this with attachment, care, security, contentment on one side, and on the other side the pillars. What is there, what you would like to measure, and then we can find anything. This is the first. I have a lot of examples what is important, but I think it's a very, very tough business to find these issues, but we will measure. This is the first one. The second point, that what is the thing we measure? It's very tricky when we look at the numbers, and just thinking through it, I think there are four main kind of stuff that we can measure. Probably there are more, but the ideas. First, we can measure access to something. Do we have something or not? One of the best examples is access to internet. Is it there or is it not? Or access to nuclear bomb, is it there or is it not? It's a kind of measure, and it may have quality too. And it's important because the question behind this measurement of access, that what we need to be able for something or to do something. And it's different from the thing that is the most widespread kind of measure when we measure availability or costs, how much we have. And this is what we have mostly, that we measure something on a scale, P is a salary equals something, P is a number, GDP, and so on. These are the what I call the availabilities. This is the most widespread. There is a third type of thing we can measure. This is ability to act. Mr. Friedman gave a lot of examples of it, that ability to win a war or initiate a conflict. So it's an ability that happened. If someone did something, he can do it again, or something like this. If someone could prevent floods, he can prevent them again. So it's not about infrastructure, it's about stories of the past. And the fourth thing, what to measure, it's alarms. Probability of flood.
What did you say? Alarms?
Alarms, threats. Probability of a flood, probability of an internet attack, that it may happen. I think it's important because there are not only availabilities that we can measure. This is the what to measure, and the other question, so maybe I use a little bit more time of mine for the first round, if it's okay. But
No.
Okay, no. So the second question, whom to measure. So I will be very short, and I can go back later. The organization of nature and technology do not fit to national borders, and we have to do something with it. That's what I call knots in the web. Put it very simply, the Hungarian ecological situation is in Carpathian Basin, so we cannot measure only Hungary. This is one of the great issues, Danube, even floods and other things. How we measure it, or in defense, a lot of countries can only interpret the defense capacity in alliances. Or we are members of the European Union. I want to speak a lot about it because I think it's very important. To put it very simply, what to measure, Texas or the United States, Hungary or the European Union, and how to solve this issue. I have a long list of how to solve it, but it's something to be. There is one example. There is an indicator of economic complexity that measures countries not only on their achievement and qualities, but there is a weighted sum for countries that includes their export and import partners. Because Hungary has a more complex economy in this index. It's made by the MIT because our economic partner is Germany. So something like this. The other to measure stuff is that what I call circle in the sand. That national entity, how to think, and what we measure in this way, representative vectors, or the government or things like that. And then I stop here, and the question I put later that how we measure something. That's my stop. These are my most wise proposals.
Thank you. So the first round, everybody has around 5 minutes, and I hope that maybe we can do a second round, and then you can continue.
Hello, thank you for inviting me here. My name is Judith Costa, and I'm from this university from Vilnius. And I'm here to represent environmental economists, so those learned ones. And I'm going to talk about indicators which are relevant in the sense of ecological measures. And I can mention here, for example, CO2 emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. But what I would rather concentrate on is ecological footprint. I think it could be useful for us because it's flexible enough. It can be calculated not only for individuals but for companies, organizations, countries as well. Yes, it is the human impact on nature, basically. And as just a brief reflection for yesterday, it's important for an entity to have the specific geopolitical location in this indicator or ecological features or biocapacity, for example. These are all very essentials in this indicator. And yes, what could help us a lot is technological development, as it can expand our ecological space, our biocapacity, make our situation better, or the situation of the entity better. And yes, there is of course a sustainability trade-off between those entities who are overshooting their biocapacities and those who are undershooting. And I think we should favor those ones who or compensate those entities who are undershooting with this indicator. And overall, globally, it's useful when these over and undershootings are balanced. So there are entities such as cities who are basically overshooting, and then other entities such as rural areas who are undershooting, but overall it's acceptable. Yes, and yes, later, of course, we have to decide on the weights of these kind of indicators, and as I'm here to represent environmentalists, so of course environmental indicators are the most important ones. And therefore I will mention another indicator, the possible indicator, which is the subjective well-being and ecological footprint ratio. As at the end of the day, it would be useful to sustain, which is worth to be sustained. And it does matter how much does it cost to reach the kind of happiness for us. And of course, this was a huge normative judgment from me. That's all I wanted to share now. I hope this was all stupid enough. Thank you.
Simple, we call it.
Simple, thank you.
We are Europeans. In America, they call it stupid.
If it's not complicated, it's not real.
Yeah, wait, please.
Please, last.
Good morning to everyone. It's an honor to be here with you, and apart from the fact that I have a distinguished position at the center, the future Social Protection Center. I'm a member of the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and I'm the first hearing impaired member of this committee since 2011. And my research has been stemmed from my own experience and being disabled and since my childhood, and the modern technology and the upcoming solutions will, I think, revolutionize the perception of disability and new abilities, even enhance skills. And before getting that business, I'd like to go back or refer to the yesterday presentation because I think it's very important to bear in mind the relevance of the notion of good life, as Janos said this morning. We have heard about human conditions, wealth, GDP, high DI index in relation to the concept of good life, and moreover, we heard a very interesting presentation about success and performance at the individual level. Within this framework of these topics, I think we can rely on the notion the so-called founding fathers of the United States established or introduced and enshrined in the Constitution of the United States as a spirit of the Constitution, which is the notion of pursuit happiness. And I think it is very important issue in terms of finding the best answer. And my question could be here the following: what's the relationship between performance and happiness at the social level in terms of interpreting the notion of good life? So I think that the most important kind of, let's say, introduction to my short-term contribution. Today, my main approach is around technology. And I have identified at least 4 or 5 aspects or phases when it comes to the evolution of technology. The first one is the wearable devices, like, for example, smart watches and so on. The second one is about invasive devices. We can talk about different kind of implants, for example. The third one is about the DNA-related technology. I'm talking about biotechnology here. The next one is about robotics, nanotechnology included. And the final final phase could be the artificial intelligence related solutions and development. And when it comes to the indicators, indices, and measurable concepts, I would like to cover 3 elements or issues. The first one is about the issue of data collection. The second one is about big data as a notion and the practice and the evolution of big data. And finally, I'd like to touch upon concrete indicators or indices within the framework of the Inclusive Economic Development Index. Let's see the first one. The first one is about, as I mentioned, the data collection. I think most data are hardly effectively comparable, and I think it's a huge challenge we are going to face when finalizing this index. The second issue within this topic is that even standardized data and figures have significant errors. And in relation to this, I think I'm convinced that even most international institutions and bodies have their not only own agendas but preferences, and it leads us to the issue of evolution of big data, which is underway with the challenges of privacy-related issues. And as the big data evolves, it can outdate the current statistical methodologies and procedures. And within this framework, measuring technological evolution or developments may face other obstacles due to, let's say, companies' access to information and strategic planning. Let's see the recent issue of Facebook scandal. And finally, let's talk about some concrete indicators. Since I'm particularly interested in labor market, education, and social policy, I think activity rates is extremely important when it comes to the fact that humans must have daily activities and aims to pursue their happiness and maintain smooth and stabilized development. And in relation to this, turnover rates for unemployment, long-term unemployment, is also very important because stamina and drive of society relies on productivity and creativity of citizens, and forms of jobs and forms of remuneration also important. And finally, I think years spent healthy after retirement is also very crucial. Thank you.
Okay. I think I will outdo Judith in stupidity, limiting myself into 2 remarks, especially because I'm going to be the rapporteur of this group of the plenary session. My first remark is that I think what we put together here ought to be tractable. So there is a danger of always pushing things toward more and more complex setups and relationship between several items. The second remark of mine is that there is a danger, I think, that the political conditions of a good life and a unity of order would be just not considered a serious enough issue. And I take it that that's one of the most serious challenges that we face. For example, I think that for the strength of the European political association, whatever institutional form it will take, depends on the economic and political strength of the Visegrad group and also the Baltic countries and the countries in the Balkans. Now, there are political preconditions for making this set of countries strong economically, politically, socially, and so on and so forth. And that might be a question from which we can derive issues of measuring or focus points and so on and so forth. Thank you.
So, thank you for the invitation, and it's really exciting to see very different views or very different aspects of futuring. And well, I'm the Dean of Faculty of Information Technology and Bionics at Pázmány University, and from the technological point of view, from the technological side, what I think can be included here, apart from what Laszlo Lovasa summarized, is that if you look at a country or a region, from the technological point of view, you can measure basically the current status of their technological improvement. That's one indicator that could be a very important indicator or factor in this. And another thing is their investment in R&D in these fields, because these two actually shows us what the relationship of the country or the region to the future is. So these are probably very simple measurements or well, numbers that you can export from current financial or some summaries. And referring to, so the issues to think about is basically these two numbers that can be measured. And another thing is, what I was thinking of is the flexibility of these systems to change, both legally and from the educational side, so also from educational point of view, what is the flexibility of these systems to change? If we look at artificial intelligence or this automation, or I could give other examples, is if a whole change can only, I mean, in education, if change can only go through the system in 10, 15 years, then it hinders the country or the region to react to new research results or new development results or new results in these fields. So, but also that doesn't mean that I mean it's the end of the bird if the flexibility is not quick, but definitely the system, the legal system and educational system should have a flexibility. We could factor this or look at this information, how new subject, how new the educational areas can be introduced into the system and basically develop. So one area is, if you look at smaller countries like Hungary, definitely true that research and development in every areas of these new technologies cannot be done. It's just too small a country for these areas. I mean to fully cover these areas and exploit. So definitely it is connected to both the social and the ecological geopolitical tasks or pillars to see what are the possibilities and what should be the strength points in making changes, improving flexibility in these terms. So from the technological point of view, definitely very exciting technological advancements are coming. Very important to see that, well, I'm almost 40 years old and I feel myself that I don't like change, right?
Wait until you get older. But then you do like change.
Yes.
You just can't get it.
Some people get to the age that we don't like change. Different tools working with different logic that I get used to, but the car is too smarter than I am, or so there is an age when you can process change much quicker and adapt to change much quicker. There is an age that it's getting more and more difficult to adapt to change. And what I see now, I mean, in the Industrial Revolution, it worked over, 50 to 100 years, and that was 2 or 3 generations. And over the 2 or 3 generations, that change actually seeped through the system. But now the changes are coming like 20 or 10 or even quicker. Either, I think I gave this example for technology, that large companies like Intel cannot really predict over 10 years what the technological advancements will be. They don't have the research results or development results for beyond 6 or 10 years what they will have as mass product. So this is really scary in terms of both on the educational flexibility side. If we start off with a certain device or structure or research result with a student, as soon as they finish their education, the whole system provides newer and newer technologies that they have to adapt. At that age, they still can adapt to that. But if you look at this process, it's just evolving quicker. So these are important factors that I think need to be included. Thank you.
In dealing with reality, there are 2 methodologies: the essay and the model. The essay is vastly superior in representing subtlety, uncertainty, possibilities. The essay allows you to have a comma, and then the positive. So most of my work is as an essayist, because in describing the world, the models I build tend to be simplistic. An example, in World War II, we had a military model that the Soviets were going to overwhelm us if they attacked Germany. Okay. They had many more tanks than we did. There was a comma there, but they don't have any way to get the fuel to the tanks. In a model, in the military models that were built, that was left out, because the model itself is a much more abstract and incomplete state. So the model is a set of prisms that don't connect necessarily. The essay is a whole. Now, the model has the tremendous advantage of efficiency. It represents reality in an efficient way. It has the weakness of lack of subtlety. And so that subtlety is frequently at the heart of the model. So think of two modes of modeling: linguistic and pseudo-mathematical. By pseudo-mathematical, not necessarily quantitative, but non-quantitative models, which is what are being built here and what we're trying to build. So in the models that we're building here, the fundamental question is, how do you disaggregate? Because the entire point of the model is to take the things that we've said in our essays and our comments and disaggregate them into discrete elements that can be put on the flowchart and shown to reveal things that are not present with the clarity. Okay. So what do we select to be good? All right? What do we select to be important? So one measure of this could be happiness. Another argument could be made that happiness is much overrated. Another element could be technology. Another way to put it is, which kind of toy will dominate this generation? But the toy is consistent. It simply does something better. We could go in many different directions. So the struggle in the geopolitical modeling that I do is to try to decide what actually matters. How do I break it apart? And how do I take the essay and turn it into a model? One of the ways that we're beginning with is, in my company, we have all in the company written many essays. We've written books, we've written many things. We're beginning with the essays and going back and saying, what do we say? Mm-hmm. What in the essay is there, and pulling them out? So there's somebody working in books I wrote and pulling out things that are non-subtle and throwing away the rest because it doesn't fit into it. This becomes a very tedious thing, because the question then is, why don't you just read a damn book? You know, well, why are you doing this? And that really is the question. So then the question becomes, how do you represent it? The standard model has a quantitative element. Many times the quantification is falsification. I have developed a metric. The metric leaves out so many essential things. This is particularly in warfare. Not particularly warfare, in warfare. So I measure the capability of a military force. The element that the Vietnamese are prepared to die for their country at a rate infinitely higher than Americans are prepared to die to keep them from having company. How do you include that? You know, what is the metric of that? How do you measure that, especially beforehand? And remember, the most important part of a model is beforehand. Afterwards, you know. So then how do you represent it? And in the representation, this is a problem that we've had, that Zoltan's essay just blew me to the other side of the world. It's hypercomplexity. We substitute for the essay hypercomplexity. In other words, we have everything in the essay broken down to little boxes that go on and on and on infinitely and result in nothing. How do you make the decision and this is the important thing, of all the complexities in the world, what is the hierarchy? And that's not an easy thing to do. What is the hierarchy of complexity? So hypercomplexity solves itself by hierarchy. Hierarchy excludes. How do you make sure you don't exclude something important? Important to whom? And so we talked of happiness, the pursuit of happiness. One of the things the founders did is never defined it. The important part is that the central feature of the American regime is the pursuit of something that everybody understands and nobody can explain.
Pursuit of happiness as they fit.
Jefferson left, that was not in the Constitution, that was in the Declaration of Independence. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And you could sit there and say, yes, and then sit there going, what? And Jefferson enjoyed himself. So the idea that common language is unambiguous. Now here we get to the heart of the problem modeling. Modeling is unambiguous. Language is the heart ambiguous. Language is far truer than modeling, because modeling is something I made to simplify the essay. So you wouldn't have to look at the whole essay and think about it. Now it's represented and I know the hierarchy. But how do I measure happiness? So, yeah, Ginny, well, it's the United Nations, whoever has it, okay, it's an authority. But is happiness the same for us all? Well, obviously not. And since it's not the same for all, what are you measuring? Well, these have to be measured. I'm not an enemy of modeling. That my background is in modeling, in operations research. So this is not something, but this is the most ambitious thing that you can attempt, to model the human condition. All right? So we've spoken of changes happening so fast. For me, it's not. There's been a cell phone. It's been here for 20 years. It's been made more complicated, somewhat more reliable, more confusing. Change? No, I haven't seen change. To me, what is amazing about technology is how slowly it changes. How rapidly the technologist thinks it's changing because it's inside. And from the outside, it's a damned cell phone. Okay? And now I can get email. Good. I still can't use the apps, but I need to. So, what I want to suggest here is, and this is more for my team, which I will go back and blow up everything and make them very unhappy, is we have a modeling system which is a tree. We begin with the military of a country. The Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. Army, armor, infantry, logistics. Okay? Armor. Tanks, armored personnel carriers, wheeled vehicles. Very logical, very complete. What the hell are we doing? Well, what is it that we're going to get here? We're going to get a quantity of who has more, which measures nothing. So we have to go back, and I'm very pissed at you for this. I wish I didn't need this aggravation.
Small hat.
It has to go back and ask the question, what makes a difference? And to do that outside the essay form, so that you can represent it in a certain iconic way and move on. And this is the real problem, to take happiness and represent it in such a way which is not your own personal conception of happiness, which is not all your friends' conception of happiness, which could also apply to someone who has complete contempt for your conception of happiness. I will give one example and stop. When I was in China, I was looking at a store that an American had bought that wasn't making money. It turned out that the Chinese direct manager had hired all his relatives. I said, how could you do this? Because the disinterestedness of the Anglo-American world, he must be completely disinterested. And he looked, how would you not hire your relatives? Who would you hire? somebody you don't know merely because he's better at this. It was a very interesting talk. What we regard as corruption in that picture, they regard us as inhuman. So now how do you face this? So this is not in any way a critique of what's going on here. I'm very excited about what's going on here. It is simply my experience of trying to do something not too dissimilar and spending now almost a year beating my head against the wall. How do you translate an essay into a symbology like this? That's what we have to figure out. And the Chinese are corrupt. They should love their families.
So it's culture, that's how they culture. We take it for granted. They go gradually, incrementally from yourself. So we have the concept of self, but the self starts from your family, kinship, then community, village, then all under that. Yes. I have 2 points, very simple. One, as I have mentioned, and many have also said so. I mentioned yesterday that the indicator level have to be as simple as possible. 2, about how we, especially for the first category, ecological and geopolitical. For me, I think these are the 2 level of measuring or understanding.
Try to speak up.
Yeah. Because for me, ecological is more sort of basic, necessary before we talk about geopolitical, social, economic, cultural changes. I remember the U.S. Intelligence Council has organized the World Trade, Global Trade 2020, 2030, that kind of reports. In their recent 2030 report, they also, for the first time, invite people from natural, social, technological sciences, information sciences, and they have had a kind of consensus ecology, either by ecological footprint or other indicators. But the ecology in general, but more necessarily, for instance, land, water, forest, all those sort of things are very basic, fundamentally basic, necessary, which can immediately or indirectly, sooner or later, result in geopolitical conflict, in a socio-economic crisis, in a cultural, so-called clashes of civilizations, etc., etc. So I handle this in mind. Should we put them together as one category, or there should be an ecological first? Then you go to geopolitical, technological. But of course, it's all connect one another, because by technological innovation, you may resolve problem with, say, lack of water or lack of land. This could be the case very soon, but we don't know. So this are simply the 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. So I would continue from your points. I would start with the ecological and geopolitical pillar. And as you remember, yesterday we talked about these 4, that basically the ecological and geopolitical is the basis on which the other 3 is based.
Yes.
Now, I would tear it apart, 3 parts, this ecological and geopolitical pillar. First, in relation to the peace and security, because I'm convinced that without peace and security, there is no care, attachment, and contentment. And I would really, I really hope, George, that you will have your index up and running, because
Well, you just delayed it by 3 months.
but that would be the basis, because the first would be what Judith, you mentioned, the ecological footprint, arable land, energy capture, water, that part, which basically indicate the self-sustainability of a social entity. And that, obviously, we are talking about countries. The second would be the communications, in a sense, and that is related to the technology as well, physical, virtual. And the third is we are talking about the how do we deal with the political community, the political system, Laurent mentioned. And I use the word nimbleness, vitality of the system. So not from the traditional political right, left, whatever, but the nimbleness, which is basically consists of two things: the ability to understand, to comprehend what the heck is going on. It's easy with a flood, because the water is in your cellar or in your house. But there are more subtle changes that you have to comprehend. For example, what George mentioned yesterday, NGOs in Belarus. What the heck they are doing? Do-gooders. or other things. So a political system has to have the capability to understand, to comprehend what's going on. And the second is the organizational capability to get things done, to act on it. And I mean the system, not only, leadership is important, but the system has to respond. Sometimes there are so many issues that it don't, and it should not go up to the top. It should be solved on local levels. So it's a nimbleness of the whole political system for the res publica, for the issues of the community. And this is why I would measure it from the results. We have data for reaction times. We have data, for example, be that, how do you call hunger, famine, or floods, or you name it. And that relates to what Christoph mentioned, the capacity of change or flexibility. I call it organization capability, the ability to act, get the things done. And you can do lots of things. If you don't comprehend what you are doing, you make harm. You make things even worse. So we have to pick those elements, and as I said, I would rely on the ecological part to the data sources that Judith mentioned, and on geopolitics and nimbleness on George's themes.
Another question for you.
Yeah?
How the Chinese get things done and how the Americans get things done are wildly different.
Yes.
They don't even want to be similar. Okay. How do you wind up measuring the components of decision making when in the United States it may be Intel that's the decision maker, and in China it might be a highly centralized process, possibly?
This is why I said that I try to come from the results. Let me say this. In China, 1.3 billion people, some 400 million living in cities, and in the next 10 years, they want to bring another 500 million people to cities. And the flats are there already. If you go to Inner Mongolia, where there was a oasis 10 years ago, and 1,000 people living there. Now there is a 200,000 member city built. Now the question is whether people will be happy there if there is no water supply or sewage, or how you provide for them. It seems that China, whatever is the decision making, they make things done. They do make these things done. But I don't know the answer. But
I'm thinking about going across 100 countries. The difficulty in defining for each country what is being done, how is it being done. It's an asymmetric problem.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And I will come back on the target, happiness or whatever.
Okay.
Now, so still, so I am talking about now the ecological and geopolitical pillar as the basic pillar in relation to the peace and security at this stage. In this angle, I will look for some databases or indicators that would indicate the cost of peace. Let me give yet again a example, US example. In the US, the prison system is privatized. Hence, the inmates in the US on a per capita basis is the highest in the world, because private interest is there to fill those bloody prisons. Now, the argument is that to keep the public peace, domestic, I'm not talking about the international peace, I'm talking about the, whether this indicator indicates the domestic peace, it's a question, but I think the cost of peace, domestically and internationally, how much, for example, Slovakia is ready to give in for the Visegrad 4 when we discuss migration with the this kind of, because it's basically, it's about peace, internal peace or regional peace. Okay, on that, I wanted to say only this. Now, on the, I would move to the technology pillar in relation to the attachment. And there, I would call it, and I don't know the data sources I want to go, but I would compare the direct human relationships versus the human relationships through technologies. Twitter or coffee. Facebook or walk along the Danube or the Yellow River or the Potomac. Or the Colorado River in Austin. And I have a good reason to believe that we can capture this because the Barabashi Lab at the Northeastern University, they have full access for the global Facebook, Twitter data.
So does everybody else.
Yes. Yeah. No, but they know what to do about it, with it. And also, they've been working with the telecommunications companies, so we have the potential to access these databases, obviously not on a personal basis, but we can know these data. For example, mothers spending time with their children, or distance parenting, or cars with television for the back seat to shut up the children, which is also a, and Christopher comment, what you have is just midlife crisis. Your energy will come back, I'm curious. I've been there, done it a couple of times. And I would add one more element which is not related to this, and this is the virtual knowledge cooperation or sharing. Let me give you an example. The Chinese are building up a 50 million people area in China north of Macau. similar to Shenzhen, north of Hong Kong. And this will be a place where cities will be assigned to develop new technologies. Thousands of startups, finance. Just like Budapest Laci mentioned yesterday, that even a single scientist, the probability of a single scientist to be successful is to write plenty of things, to try plenty of things. And this is what the Chinese do. They open the flood, I mean the mind flood, and they believe that something will come out of them and cross-fertilize each other. And for example, this region already cut a deal with the EU that they exchange. Obviously, nothing happened because everybody tried to keep the new stuff close to their heart or chest. But I think the economic complexity, what Balázs mentioned, and that index is based on country data, but this transfer back and forth, subtle transfer of knowledge will be important and will have an impact on the nimbleness of countries. So these are my thoughts, and I totally agree with you, George, that it should be essayistic. I consider essays as hypotheses on the results of the models. And yesterday we agreed that we want to do something socially meaningful and impactful and understandable and simple, and the way is not tables but essays. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments and active participation. Unfortunately, our time is over, but I think that the last two questions was about the connection of normative standards and pillars, and therefore we have completed this.
Yeah, forget that, and let's have a discussion with you, and then we can reflect on each other.
Before discussion, maybe I add just 1 minute. I think another thing which is really also crucial, especially if we look at the rest of the world, not only West, which might be under the socio-economic or somewhere, I mean, demographic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, yeah.
Very crucial.
Yeah, it's in there. We have a particular person.
Yeah.
I have a question. It seems that in many of the items that we're going to measure and use as the basis, there's different defining characteristics. So some of them, as you mentioned, would be looking at the Carpathian Basin, and some of them would be looking at within the borders of a nation state. And my question is, are those compatible in the same model? Do we need to have the same defining characteristics for each of the items, or does it not matter if some are more broadly based and some are more defined geographically?
From the work what we have done so far, we constrained ourselves for countries, because we want to use the World Bank, OECD database, and those are based on countries. But in the same time, when, for example, the Visegrad 4 prime ministers meet with Angela Merkel, they start with the fact that the export-import relationship between the V4 countries and Germany is higher than Germany and France. So why is it that Germany has a special relationship? I know why, historically, because it's their fate. But again, we talk about change. The relationship historically strong with France, but historically strong with the V4 countries as well. But these countries don't act together. Actually, we are competitors in a sense. So what we do with this, but we, on a essayistic way, and if we have enough money and resources to touch these kind of issues, or China in the Southeast Asia. Huge Chinese communities. Why the Chinese don't put together a Commonwealth, like the Brits? How many Brits are in Kenya? But still, Kenya is the part of the Commonwealth. So these kind of issues will come up, but it's not our piece of cake yet.
So we're looking at national entities.
National countries.
Countries.
We won't measure Kurdistan because we cannot.
Right. Okay.
Tuomo, do you have any comment?
Yes, I have. I've been listening several.
Introduce yourself because not everybody.
Oh yes, Tuomo Kuosa from Finland. I work in a private foresight company. We are producing a foresight tool for horizon scanning. My background is in sociology, partly in economics as well. So the indexes I've been listing seem to fall under the category of socio-economical. So I understand that these would go quite closely to the normative standards. So I have tried to map things which would fall under these two pillars which we have in this workshop under work. One thing from these pillars which I would like to enhance or rise up is it's actually the standard of living that goes to the socio-economical side, but actually the purchasing power, which is how it is increasing. So freenomics, free services that we get for free. The platform economy is providing us so much. Every year we get more and more, even we don't have to pay anything for these new products that we get. And so the standard of living, there is a saying that in 17th century, a king had the same standard of living as an unemployed person at the moment, at least in Finland they say that.
It's true everywhere.
Yeah. So,
although the king didn't have heating.
Yeah, and they were in danger to die. They didn't have vaccination. Vaccination is another thing which is like a huge thing. So the mortality rate, I would say the mortality rate is probably the most important indicator of any development. And mortality rate has, I would say, two aspects. The infant mortality rate, that is obvious, but the other thing is the adult mortality rate. Because if we talk about the situation 200 years ago, it is assessed that the risk for an adult male person to die in violently get killed, that was at least 100 times bigger than at the moment. So
you use mortality, but not the life expectancy?
Yeah, mortality.
Why would you choose that mortality over life expectancy?
That's like not dying to your old age.
Okay.
So mortality means
so
like
mortality from violence.
Yeah, due to violence. Like in US, that is very high, as we have heard, it's going up. Venezuela is terrible and so on.
Yeah.
So, well, mortality rate, that's one huge aspect. But the standard of living, there is another aspect related to the standard of living, which is the free hours that we have. So, how big part the work takes from our days, and how many hours the household work takes from our days. These have huge impact on our happiness. So these should be assessed. So the 3 hours, I would say that is the easiest way to make the assessment. The standard of living, the purchasing power and 3 hours, these are two indicators for this standard of living, as I would see it. Well, there were many other good indicators like the the ability to adapt to the change, like the technological change, the labor change of the labor and the immigration and that sort of things. Patents and research papers, these are two indicators for the technological development in national scale. I wouldn't say that these are that important, but they are still valid indicators.
Thank
and
you.
the Gini index. Okay, there were.
Now, we are overrepresented by Texans because Ed is.
I'm not a Texan.
Arizona?
New Mexico.
Oh, sorry.
He is not a Texan.
Ed, do you have some? Ed is a former American diplomat.
Yes, thank you. I've had the privilege of working on two indices previously, and also on what we used to call in the State Department the global confrontation forecast that we would prepare. The last one I prepared was looking at 2025. But it was more of an essay base rather than a model base, and I recognize what George is saying, that the bridge between an essay and a model can be huge and treacherous. But one of the things that I've taken the liberty of doing is, as people have spoken, is to list the challenges that we face, which is something that in the two previous indices that I helped with, one was the Prosperity Index put out by the Legatum Institute, and another one by an independent institute on social responsibility. Both of them were attempting to look at incredibly complex questions about the human condition and trying to quantify them and trying to make them measurable and forecastable. Each one of you identified in your remarks challenges to what we're trying to accomplish here that I think are perhaps worth listing. Maybe not in the way in which you intended as you identified them, but maybe useful, just if you don't mind, just my going down the list. The first one I noted was sustainability, and that is, when we look at something like this, are we looking at the sustainability of each contribution, each measurement? Can we rely on that measurement not to change so much over time as to change the final outcome of what it contributes to? The next is reverse compatibility. Can we construct an index that we can go backwards on instead of forwards on and still have it present some valid results that we can measure against things that have already happened? And then cross-compatibility. Can we use that same form of, that same system of measurement to look at whether this is valid in China, or in Venezuela, or in the United States,
Africa,
or in
Middle East.
the Bronx?
Yeah.
The next one is, and Tuomo made a very good point about this, we need to look at every part of this and give it a reality check. Are we looking at mortality or at something as kind of nondescript and hard to measure as how much time people have to do household work, and is that a valid measurement of happiness in a household? That offers us a reality check on what we're looking at.
You are thinking about your own household, aren't you?
You bet. I do far too much. I do far too much household work, and I want it measured.
I know you are. Ed, he had over times. Can you?
Yes, and I just have two more items, and that is, are what we're measuring are the indices we're using subject to change that make them no longer valid? And the last one is, where can we be assured that in our total measurement that we're reducing ambiguity, making sure that we're not using one measurement that has inclusive indices in it for another and counting it twice?
Right.
I'd like to, there's a fundamental speed question. Is this a snapshot of the world now, or are we attempting to model outcomes? So, it is one thing, you talked about historical. In military modeling, we benchmark each model against historical battles. So we know at least that it seems to work. Okay. But in this particular case, it seems to be static. We're not predicting anything. We don't have to go back. So the real question is the intention to create a predictive model of the way the world will look, or a static model of the way the world looks right now?
I don't have the answer, and the wrap-up session will be about Laura reporting on
Distorting it.
what have happened, and so we will put this all together. But this is about trying to create a basis for our next, and Zoe mentioned, next couple of months or next couple of years work. And if we are right, we started something big. So this is why, right, we are full of humility for the topic. So I don't know that answer yet.
But it has to be first to know what is going, then see how we may know the future.
Right, you have to find a model, but if it works, you're going to be doing this either an annual report
Yes, exactly.
or a forward-looking model trying to explain what will happen.
May I add something? Right? You see, the whole endeavor is about how the world will look like in 1050. Right? And our task is as comprehensible as you can get. However, there is a principle, or there is a sort of understanding at the core of this project that we are talking about good life in a unity of order. Right? It should really filter out lots of conceptions, ideas, and so forth. And we either stick to that or we don't. If we stick to that, then we have to start out of that. It's not just something that everyone has in mind about what will happen in 2020. If we can agree on the starting point, then we have to foist everything into that sort of thinking. I mean, that's a necessity of working together, of having some sort of common approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your participation. So we have not a 30 minutes long cafe break, just I think 10 minutes long cafe break. And we will meet again in the other building, the faculty club.
Coffee is here and the
Coffee is here and yeah, we will meet there. Thank you very much.